Hello, my art-loving friends. I am Deborah Kay, and I welcome you to Paint with a Passion. Today, we're going to paint this stunning yin and yang. It's super easy and it's super fun. So, here's my recipe. You can pause here to gather what you need, or just refer to the list in the description area below this video. Get all your goodies together, and let's make the magic happen as we paint with a passion. I'm painting on a 12-inch round wood cutout. Make sure you check for any rough edges and sand those off before you begin. And when I do that, I just use an old small grit nail buffer, the kind that comes on a sponge, and that's usually sufficient. If you prefer, you can use sandpaper. That works great too. Now that my gesso is completely dry, I'm going to paint the entire surface with black. Make sure to get the sides of whatever you're painting as well, whatever is going to be visible. Now, I started with a little paint in an old plastic lid, but I decided to just pour the paint directly on the circle. And it doesn't need to be fancy, it just needs to be evenly covered, because we're going to be painting designs all over the entire surface. Okay, so when you're painting on anything that's porous, I recommend you always use a gesso primer. It keeps your paint from soaking into the wood or whatever porous surface that you're painting on. You can get canvases that are pre-primed, or you can prime your own. Just remember to prime all the areas that you're going to paint on. And the bigger the area, the bigger the brush, and a little goes a long way. I like to use a coarse brush when I'm applying it because it covers easier. Also, the bristle type brush helps to create a wood-like texture if you're going to apply a thick coat of gesso. You can also add a little bit of paint to tint your gesso if you don't want a white base. You can use anything you want as your canvas. It could be bigger or smaller, round or square. It can be wood or stone or canvas. Whatever you want. I look at it like the world is my canvas. However, I don't encourage graffiti. So, first things first. If you are painting on a canvas that is not round, you will want to draw in a main circle to encompass your yin and yang design. Using my largest stencil and a white chalk pencil, I'm going to find the center of the main circle and draw a line down the center to divide it into two even sides. I am also going to clearly mark the very center of the circle. And then I'm using my ruler to finish the center line for the entire length of the circle. Then, lining up the stencil with the center chalk line, I'm going to trace a semicircle from the top and then ending at the center chalk mark. Now, my stencil leaves little break lines where I trace along, so I'm going to just turn it a little bit and then go ahead and fill in the gaps with the stencil. Then, I am going to repeat the same thing on the opposite side from the center chalk mark to the bottom. Again, I spin the stencil just a little and line it up so I can fill in the gaps. So now I basically have an S, or a backwards S, that's dividing the circle. Now I'm going to add the little circles in the middle of, I guess we'll call them the semicircles. Now I erased my middle line, but I can still see it. I'm lining up my stencil with the semicircle and making sure I can see that center line passing through the center of the stencil. And now I can just trace a small inner circle, and then I'll do that again for the other end or the other side. Does this even make sense? I think it does. Make sure to spin the stencil a little bit so that you can fill in the gaps, or if you're comfortable, just pencil in the gaps. If you don't have a stencil, you can use a compass. And if you don't have a stencil or a compass, there's a number of things you can use. Things like lids, coins, cups, bottles. If you use one of these, just make sure that you use a ruler to measure everything so your distances are equal. And of course, if you're really good, you can just go freehand. Voila! Houston, we have a yin and yang. I decided to repaint this side of my yin and yang white. I was going to do something a little bit different, but I changed my mind. I'm using a sponge for 2 reasons. 1, I'm going to blend in some gray strips with a sponge anyways, so why get a brush dirty that I have to clean? And 2, mainly because I like the texture it makes. Kind of a suede effect. I may have to draw my circle back on, but that's okay. These things happen. When I add the strips of gray, I want to make sure to use a generous amount of paint. This allows it to stay wet long enough in order to blend. After you've added your gray strip, flip your sponge or grab another sponge and pick up some white and begin blending the gray and the white along the edges of the gray strips. Use a small amount and just add more as you need it, just slightly overlapping the gray. Tiny back and forth, up and down the strip. If the paint begins to dry, just reload your sponge and keep working it until you have it exactly like you want it. Remember to use a different sponge or the other end of your sponge for every color. And if you can, maybe have a third sponge to do the final touches, kind of like a dry sponge cleanup. If you get any gray into the areas where it should be solid white, just wait a few minutes for the paint to dry and then use a sponge with only white paint to touch it up after it's dry. And the same goes for the opposite. If you've got white in the gray, do the same thing with a sponge with only gray. You can add the strips in long or short segments, whichever works best for you. Now you might be wondering, why in the world are we even adding gray stripes to this piece? I thought zebras were just black and white. Well, if you take a look at photos of zebras, you'll notice that their body color varies from white to gray and even some beige depending on the lighting. So why not add the illusion of illumination? And I'm adding the gray strips because I can, and because I like it, and because it looks super awesome. So yeah, strips. Now these strips, they don't need to be perfect because we are going to paint a pattern over them anyways. So don't worry too much if they aren't perfectly spaced or exactly straight. Trust me, it's going to look amazing when we're all finished. My Infinity Butterfly, River Rock Heart, and the Bottle Art Zebra videos, they all have more details and give great examples of blending. So make sure to check those out. I retraced my small circle on the white side with a regular lead pencil, and I'm going to paint it solid black. I chose a small angled brush so I could easily paint around the curve. I'm also tidying up the division along the S split and giving it a good clean line. And then using my super skinny fine lining brush, I'm adding a silver division line between the black and the white. I put a link in the description below this video so you can check out my video on how to make your own super skinny fine lining brush. I have bought so many fine lining brushes only to find out that none of them are ever skinny enough. Not even makeup eyeliner brushes, so I make my own. Some of mine are curved and some of them are straight, and they work great for lines like this and also for things like lettering. Using a 1/2 inch flat brush, I'm painting the black side with a thin coat of Extreme Glitter Paint by Folk Art. I'm also going to apply this to the little black circle on the other side. This paint goes on like craft glue, and it's milky, which is great because you can easily see if you've missed any spots. And I'm not too concerned about a neat application because this side's going to be covered in a gazillion dots. But we do want a pretty background to match the stripes that we're going to add on the other side. This paint dries pretty fast if you're applying a light coat. If you're applying a thick coat or dots, it will take much longer. I used this type of paint on Luna Ladybug spots, and it took over 12 hours for it to completely dry. I have to say this paint is amazing. Applied lightly, it gives just a hint of a sparkle and a nice satin coat. And if you apply it thick, it looks like a gem. I love sparkle and I love gems, so yeah, one of my faves for sure. Okay, so make sure you wash your brush out right away or keep it in water because it's a goner if you leave it out with this paint on it. Now I'm painting in the little white circle using my angle brush, and then I'm going to add a gray strip to it. And it's okay if the paint goes outside of the pencil line a little bit because I'm going to be outlining it in silver. but you don't want it to go too far outside of the line. Okay, so using my super skinny fine line brush, I am outlining both small circles in silver. And I'm using my curved brush because, well, it's curved for the curves. Okay, my friends, it's time to get your dotting tools out. This part of the project actually took about an hour and a half because of the large size of this piece. So you're going to get to see some super magical time lapse going on here. I'm going to start with one of my larger dotting tools, and I'm going to place a handful of random dots throughout the black side. Now, this tool is 1/4 inch wide, but when I apply the dot, it's going to expand just a little bit. And I prefer to use less of the larger dots so that they really stand out. But you might decide to go with more. And just whatever you decide, it's going to look amazing. You might decide to use smaller tools for your biggest dots, depending on the size of the canvas that you're painting on. Next, I'm going to go down a dotting tool size, and again, just place a handful of dots and so on until I get to the biggest of my metal dotting tools. This dotting pattern is what I like to call a no-fail design because you just can't go wrong here. When using the larger flat edge tools, I try not to touch the tool to the surface because it can leave a flawed dot. Try it out on a scratch piece of wood or cardboard, and you'll see what I mean if you touch your tool all the way down. If you do end up with a bad dot, just use a wet cotton swab to erase it. You can also try dotting back over the top of your dot, but sometimes it's hard to hit the exact same spot, and then you end up with a bigger flaw than you started out with. Another trick you can use is to move one dotting size up and just cover up the whole dot. Now, if you do that on your largest dot size, make sure to add a few more bigger dots that match so you don't just have one big old dot sticking out because it might be noticeable. Or maybe that would be cool. We could call the piece One Big Dot. Or not. Using my largest metal tool, I'm going to fill in most of the empty space, but I don't want to completely saturate it. And once I filled in the majority of the space, I'm going to move down 2 sizes and do the same thing. And then I'm going to go on to the 3rd smallest tool, where it really begins to fill in all the nooks and crannies. And then finally, I'm going to use the 2nd to the smallest tool until I filled the space as much as I can without the dots overlapping. Now, a few overlapping actually look pretty cool, but try not to let that happen too much or it could get kind of sloppy. For this pattern, I won't need to reload the paint in between every single dot I make because I don't need them to look uniform in size. In fact, the randomness of it makes this look really cool. Randomness, is that even a word? Well, it is now, and I'm going with it. But yeah, I usually get maybe 3, maybe 4 dots out of one loading of the paint. A few pointers about painting with dotting tools. Make sure you keep your paint fluid. If the paint starts to get dry with a skin on top, then it's time to pour some fresh paint. Also, make sure to keep a rag handy and wipe off your tool often. When the paint starts to get a clump going on it, just wipe it off and continue. I probably wipe my tools off every 20 dots or so, depending on how fast I'm painting, and also it depends on whether my heater's on or if the AC is blowing air. Let's see, what else? I only pour small amounts of paint at a time because I just hate to waste paint. And sometimes I have to take a break, and then when I come back, the paint is a goner, and that is just a sucky situation. So I like to use one of these palettes that has several pockets. And speaking of pockets, make sure that they're deep enough so you can get a good dip on the tip of your tool. It sounds like a tagline. A good dip on the tip of your tool. Also, you want to make sure your paint is not too thick. If your paint is really thick, then it's going to leave peaks, kind of like meringue. Now, I'm sure there's a time and a place for peaks, but that's not what I'm going for here. I want flat specks and dots. So I recommend the type of acrylic craft paint that I use for dotting. Now, I'm not going to recommend a specific brand, but I will warn you that I've come across some brands that are super watery, and watery is not good for dots because your dots will expand or bleed. Pretty much what I've found is you get what you pay for. So yeah, just make sure to test out your paint on something else before you touch down your first dot on your piece. How amazing is this looking? Wow. All right, my lovely art friends, it's time to add our zebra stripes. I'm going to begin at the top and work my way down to the bottom. And I'm using a lead pencil because I can't see the white chalk pencil, obviously, on the white background. And I just want to make sure to draw lightly, just in case I need to erase anything. I recommend looking at different zebra designs to get an idea of how you want your stripes to look. But the best advice I can give is to try to avoid making the ends of the stripes rounded. If the edges are too round, they're going to end up looking more like subway tiles or stones rather than zebra stripes. Also, make sure all of your stripes don't start and end at the same place in each row because it just won't look right. Now I'm using my super skinny fine lining brush to paint in the stripes. Now, I chose this brush because I want the points of my stripes to be neat and tidy. And also, painting with this fine lining brush adds a nice thick coat. But mostly, I'm using this brush because I identify as a super skinny painter using her super skinny fine lining brush. She wishes. Okay, so most times I think of my pencil marks as a suggestion, and then whatever happens, happens when I pick up my brush. This is one of those times I will say that the pencil marks are more than just a suggestion. They should really be your guide as much as possible, because like I said, erasing lead pencil is much harder than erasing the white chalk. If you have trouble erasing any dark pencil marks, you can actually paint over them if you need to. Make sure to take your time because it's really easy to try and go faster than you should. So use up the paint that you've poured and then take a break. Go pet your cat or eat a cookie, whatever floats your boat, and then come back and pour some fresh paint and continue on and just have fun with it. Just a few notes as I'm finishing up here. I decided to paint over each of the black stripes using the Extreme Glitter black paint because it really boosts the wow factor. But I didn't think I needed to add an extra 5 minutes to the video showing you that. Also, for my varnish top coat, I used Polycrylic Semi-Gloss, and I just use one of those small paint rollers to apply it. It's the only way I will apply my top coats to flat surfaces anymore. It works great. Wow. I mean, just wow. So this was a surprise birthday gift for my most loveliest cousin. She was so surprised when she got it. And this is a picture she sent me where she keeps it on her desk. And I just love that she sees it every day. Thank you so much for joining me today to Paint with a Passion. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to painting again together real soon. Let me know what you think. Also, let me know what you'd like to see in future tutorials, and please remember to subscribe and hit that notification button. I wish you peace, love, and happiness now and always.